The truth hidden in God's comments. Most folks who call themselves Christians today don't believe there is only one truth to be found in the Hebrew Scriptures. Instead, they believe there is some sort of smorgasbord of truths, from which one just picks and chooses whatever truth they find most acceptable. Too bad for them. The truth is, the apostles fully understood the message of the Hebrew Scriptures, and they made no bones about it. They also believed that anybody who believed something that contradicted the truth they understood was not going to be saved. Paul states that emphatically in the first chapter of the book of Galatians. Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 through 12, my standardized translation. I am amazed that you are being taken back so quickly from the one who invited you, by the favor of the Anointed One, to a different word of the gospel, which is not another gospel, except there are some who are disturbing you, and wanting to alter the word of the gospel of the Anointed One. But even if we, or a messenger from heaven, should proclaim anything to you as the word of the gospel, contrary to what we proclaimed to you as the word of the gospel, let him be one under the ban. As we have stated before, I also say again at this time, if anyone proclaims anything to you as the word of the gospel, contrary to what you have taken to yourselves, let him be one under the ban. For am I persuading men, or the living God, at this time? Or am I seeking to please men? If I were still pleasing men, I would probably not be a slave of the Anointed One. For I make known to you, brothers, that the word of the gospel that was proclaimed by me as the word of the gospel, is not in agreement with man. For I neither received it from a man nor was I taught it, but via a revelation of Jesus, the Anointed One. What Paul says in that passage should settle the issue for anyone with half a brain, but unfortunately, most Christians today are content to go on believing the mishmash of contradictory beliefs they have heard in the distorted remnants of the church, established by the apostles. It has never occurred to them that the New Testament clearly reveals, the leaders of the apostolic church believed but one truth, and they also believed the truth they possessed can be found in the Hebrew Scriptures. Those who do not believe that, have never stopped to consider the implications of a statement that Jesus made in that regard. John 5. Verses 31 through 47, my standardized translation. If I provide testimony about myself, my testimony is not truthful. The one who provides testimony about me is another, and I am aware that the testimony that he provides as testimony about me is truthful. You have sent to John, and he has provided testimony about the truth. Yet I am not going to accept the testimony of a man. But I am saying these things, so that you may be saved. That individual was the lamp that was burning and appearing, but you were willing to be made jubilant for an hour, in his light. But the testimony I have, is more important than John's, for my testimony is the works that the Father gave me, so that I could complete them. The very works that I do, it provides testimony about me, that the Father sent me. And that individual, the Father who sent me, has provided testimony about me. You have neither heeded his voice, nor ever seen his visible appearance, and you do not have his word remaining in you, because you do not believe this individual, the one whom that individual sent. You search the writings, because you assume that you have eternal life in them, and those writings are the ones who provide testimony about me. And you do not want to come to me, so that you may have life. I do not accept glory from men, but I know you, that you do not have the love of the living God in yourselves. I have come in the name of my Father, and you are not accepting me. If another were to come in his own name, you will accept that individual. How can you believe me, when you are accepting glory from one another, and you are not seeking the glory that is from the only living God. Do not assume that I will make an accusation against you to the Father. The one who is making an accusation against you is Moses, in whom you have hoped. For if you believed Moses, you would probably believe me, for that individual wrote about me. But if you do not believe the things that individual has written, how could you believe the comments I made? Jesus is making the point that all the pious, pompous, pedantic, pin-headed scholars of his day were more interested in using the Hebrew scriptures to gain glory for themselves, by showing others their great erudition, than they were in actually understanding the truth of the teaching of Moses that their ancestors gave up, in order to believe a lie. That same sort of sanctimoniously silly posturing on the part of pious, pompous, pedantic, pin-headed penguins, is still going on in the church today. Consequently, I have been ridiculing the ridiculous religious beliefs of Christian scholars over the past 2 decades, because those theological boneheads have not a clue as to what the message of the Hebrew Scriptures is. Their only interest is in attaining or maintaining their reputation as a scholar. Since God called me to prepare the elect for the appearance of the Antichrist, rather than preparing pious, pompous, pin-headed penguins for pedantic posturing, I am not at all concerned about my scholarly reputation, since I don't have or seek one. So I am more than willing to run the risk of ruining my reputation by summarizing the message of the Old Testament in this short space. 1. 2 Adams are mentioned in the creation account. The Apostle Paul talks about those 2 Adams in 1 Corinthians, chapter 15, verses 45 through 49. Genesis chapter 1 describes the resurrection of Jesus Christ in the image and likeness of God, on the 6th day of creation. Genesis chapter 2 describes the creation of our forefather on the 3rd day. I have already explained these things in the booklet titled, In the Image and Likeness of God, so there is no need to explain them here. 2. When God banned Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, He gave them the promise that they could be created in the image and likeness of God, if they would only believe the promise. He also expected them to hand down the promise, from one generation to the next, as an inheritance, that each heir of the promise could bequeath to the next heir of the promise as an oral blessing. The book of Genesis is an account of how the patriarchs did that very thing. I have already explained these things in The Inheritance of the Believer, Volume 1, so there is no need to explain them here. 3. The central purpose of the covenant God made with the sons of Israel at Mount Sinai was to unify the promise after Jacob divided it up, when he blessed his sons and grandsons. Since there was no longer just one heir of the promise as there had been up to that time, God used the Mosaic covenant to create corporate Israel, a corporate body, that He claimed as His firstborn son. That corporate body functioned as a mediator, to hold title to the promise, until Jesus Christ became corporate Israel, the heir of the promise. I have also explained these things in Not All Israel is Israel, and The Inheritance of the Believer, Volume 1, so there is no need to explain them here. 4. Under the terms of the law of Moses, an individual member of corporate Israel could be cut off from corporate Israel. Various parts of that law demanded that ultimate punishment. If the sons of Israel were aware that someone had violated one of those, they were expected to execute the individual, and thereby erase his name from Israel. Even if they did not do that, God would cut him off from corporate Israel. That is, He would erase the individual's name from the census book of Israel that he maintained. For that reason, God alone knew who had been cut off from corporate Israel, and no one else had the right to say anyone was still a member of corporate Israel. I have already explained these things in Not All Israel is Israel, so there is no need to explain them here. 5. God made 2 covenants with the sons of Israel at Mount Sinai. The first covenant required the perfect obedience of the corporate body, and did not provide a means of atonement. If one individual sinned, every member of the corporate body became guilty. The second covenant provided a means of atonement for the individual. If an individual sinned, his sin could be atoned for, through a sacrificial ritual, but the corporate body still remained guilty. I have also explained these things in The Inheritance of the Believer, Volume 1, so there is no need to explain them here. 6. Because the sons of Israel failed to adhere to the requirements of both the first and second Mosaic covenants, the prophets Jeremiah and Ezekiel promised them God would offer a new covenant to the individual members of corporate Israel. He did that through the ministry of John the Baptist. But the new covenant that the Jews accepted at that time was just like the first old covenant their ancestors had accepted at Mount Sinai. It provided no means of atonement. If a person sinned, he would immediately be cut off from corporate Israel. So, God cut off from corporate Israel all the members of corporate Israel other than Jesus Christ, because they could not keep the terms of the new covenant. I have also explained these things in Not All Israel is Israel, so there is no need to explain them here. 7. When Jesus Christ was baptized by John, and accepted the terms of the new covenant, he became corporate Israel, the heir of the promise. Therefore, when he died, he atoned for the sins of corporate Israel by suffering under the curses of the Mosaic covenant. But because of his obedience to the terms of the new covenant, God was obligated to fulfill the promise and resurrect him, so that he could inherit what was promised to Adam and Eve, creation in the image and likeness of God. I have also explained these things in Not All Israel is Israel, and in the pages of the Voice of Elijah newsletter, and the Voice of Elijah update, over the past quarter of a century, so there is no need to explain them here. 8. When Christ died, his death invoked the terms of the oral testament he had made, prior to his death. Under the terms of that oral testament, all anyone has to do to inherit the promise is believe it, and apologize to God for the sins they have committed. Those who do that will be declared not guilty by God. Those who don't, won't. I have also explained these things in the pages of the Voice of Elijah newsletter, and the Voice of Elijah update, over the past quarter of a century, so there is no need to explain them here. For the benefit or detriment of those poor souls who personify the worst in all of us, I should probably tell you, I have just sketched the broad outlines of the Old Testament message the apostles called the gospel. Believe it if you care to, disbelieve it if you dare to. Makes no difference to me one way or the other. I'm just doing what God called me to do. What you choose to do with your life is your responsibility, not mine. But if you have not yet settled accounts with the Lord, you might want to give that some thought. Just a suggestion. The only way that anyone is going to make it out of this hellhole with their soul intact is by first going to God, with a completely broken heart, begging for forgiveness. Those who stupidly choose not to do that will eventually be made to realize just how stupid they are. Unfortunately, they are far too stupid to recognize their stupidity for what it is. Just saying. In case you missed my point, in the 8 paragraphs above, I provided a brief summary of the 5 things Paul mentions in the 6th chapter of Ephesians. 1. The truth. 2. A declaration of not guilty. 3. The word of the gospel. 4. Belief. 5. Any comment made by God.